All right, former President Donald Trump declaring victory on Super Tuesday. It has been a Super Tuesday for Donald Trump. He had many remarks. It was mainly a pivot to the general election, did not mention Nikki Haley. There was a brief allusion at one point, Dana Bash, where I thought he was going to say something. He said something about how we have a lot of young talent and the party needs to unify. And I thought, oh, possibly this is a pivot to a reference to Nikki Haley, but no. But he did not attack her, which is, I'm sure, for his advisors and aides, something that they're chalking up to as a victory.
No question about it. Look, could there have been a moment where Trump said, gave some kind of rhetorical olive branch to Nikki Haley? Sure. But that clearly wasn't going to happen. Maybe it will eventually. Boy, where do we even start? Tom Foreman is doing a fact check. I think he's going to have a very, very long summary of things that he is going to say about what Donald Trump said that wasn't exactly right at all. For example, I'll just give you one example. The whole notion that farmers did really well when he was having this trade war with China. Remember that America, Congress, the taxpayers had to give some money to farmers, particularly in Iowa, because they were really suffering under China. But what he was trying to do was to walk down memory lane, Caitlin, and talk about the issues that he believes are most important. I mean, we talked to Lindsey Graham earlier. He said he needs to focus on the policy. It wasn't all policy, but there were policies, whether it is foreign policy or immigration, that he thinks is going to play well.
I think we just saw right there in that speech why Donald Trump stepped in and killed that bipartisan immigration bill that had been negotiated in the Senate. Most of that speech was about immigration. He knows it's one of the #1 concerns that when you talk to voters that they have, and he is focusing his general election pitch on that. And he didn't mention Nikki Haley. He mentioned unity multiple times, which is what every single surrogate and Trump ally that has gone out tonight and urged her to drop out of the race has said for unity. And he made clear that this was focused solely on President Biden. He told a lot of lies in that statement, things that were not true. He talked about inflation in this country. He talked about energy production. As of late December, the United States was producing more oil than any country in history. So that's not something that the White House often wants to tout. But I think it was just an important moment there where you just saw that this is what the next 8 months of our lives are going to look like. That is going to be the general election pitch that he's making to voters, and it's focused mainly on immigration and crime and inflation because he believes those are going to be the issues. That looked a lot more like he did after Iowa than New Hampshire, but it also was less focused on any of the Republicans, and it was focused on what's ahead, which is obviously President Biden, as he's also responding tonight.
I think, one thing we didn't hear was how he's going to, as you said, the olive branch, but it's more than just being courteous. He needs those percentage of people to win. I'm just looking at the Virginia numbers here. He's really struggling there, perhaps not surprisingly, in the suburbs of Washington, but I do think that that's one of the issues here, but clearly focusing on President Biden in the general election.
I do. I mentioned Tom Foreman is doing fact checks for us. Let's get to Tom. Tom, take it away.
It was a lot to take in at once. It was sort of the greatest hits of many of his falsehoods. The weaponization of the DOJ, he brings it up all the time now, saying the only reason he's been charged with these crimes is because the Joe Biden administration is somehow reaching out to him. Utterly false. He's been indicted by grand juries of citizens. There have been officials in New York, officials in Georgia, and even those who have come from the Department of Justice are operating under sort of a hermetic seal from the White House, so much so that Merrick Garland has said that if he were told to do something by Joe Biden, he would quit. So any claim that this is a Joe Biden effort to prosecute him is simply not true. Energy independence, Caitlin talked about it a minute ago. This is something that Trump often likes to say, that somehow things were much better under him with energy independence. The truth is the U.S. has been moving steadily toward more energy production for quite some time now. The country has never stopped importing some foreign energy, even under Donald Trump, and we do indeed produce more now than we have before. So that's something the Biden administration could run on themselves and say they're doing a better job. He raised this new claim, which we have not heard before, about 325,000 illegal immigrants being flown around the country, flown into the country by the Biden administration. That seems to trace to one article that came out very recently that we don't really have anything to back up at this point to say whether there's truth or falsehood to it. I would say from experience it sounds specious, so we will look into that and we'll find out whether or not there's any kind of truth to that. I would tend to say probably not, because that's a very big number for people to be flying around with no sense of why they're out there. It may very well be a misunderstanding of something or misinterpretation. And lastly, he said 18 months in Afghanistan with no deaths while he was president. This has been checked out many times before. There's just no evidence that ever happened. There were times when the deaths were quite low in Afghanistan, but that also included under Joe Biden before the withdrawal. So there's no claim there. A lot of things said in a short period of time there, a lot of them not true.
Tom, thank you so much for that fact check. Abby, one of the things that the former president did talk about, and Tom mentioned this, was a plane or planes of people coming into the U.S. That is, we believe, he's referring to a parole system that it's controversial.
But it's not a secret.
But it's not a secret.
The White House announced it. The Department of Homeland Security announced that they were doing it. It would allow 30,000 applicants a month from a handful of, fewer than a handful of countries, to go through a background check, to have a sponsor, to be vetted before they are given limited permission to come into the country while their cases are adjudicated, to work for a period of time. It's not a secret.
And it's happened under prior administrations.
It happened under prior administrations. It's not a conspiracy. However, one notable thing, and Dana, hat tip to you for this, Elon Musk has been tweeting about it today. And as Caitlin reported earlier, Trump is trying to woo him in to help fund this campaign. So there's a nexus for everything. And look, Lindsey Graham, God bless him, he wants Trump to stay on message, wants him to stay on policy. That would be totally fine if Trump could do so truthfully, but he cannot and did not do that tonight. And that just illustrates, okay, it's Trump, we know he does that, but the Biden campaign is going to then have to take that and on all of these things, on immigration, on the economy, on oil and gas production, you have to correct the record first before you can even tout your own accomplishments.
Can I come back to the thing you said about Elon Musk? One of the things I found interesting about that, I think it was you, is he tweeted specifically that the administration was importing voters, which is a real hard nod to replacement theory.
Yes.
Which
Which
on
he
the
has
hard
also
Christian
endorsed,
right, or white nationalist right, is the idea that Democrats are bringing in voters of color from around the world to benefit themselves. It's a direct line to those things. And I think over time, as Trump comes out and talks more of that stuff is going to surface, and it's going to be far uglier than it was back in 2016, where there was sort of vague innuendo around it, because now there are more platforms and people feel more empowered to speak.
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk might have done it, but I think this is what you were just referring to, Abby. Donald Trump said it at an event over the weekend, said it on Saturday, said it so explicitly that I had the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, on the next morning, and I gave him a fact check. Are you bringing people in illegally in order to change the electorate of the United States? I mean, certainly it is about.
But it has you asking, right? So now it's
Well,
like, in a way, no, I'm not
yeah.
saying you shouldn't, but what it does is it pulls ideas into the mainstream that are not.
But it's important
and
to
forces
fact
us to
check.
have
Agreed.
conversations that make no sense.
There are real concerns from voters about immigration and about what's happening at the southern border and how it's been affecting major cities in the U.S., from Denver to Chicago to New York City. That is a real thing, but he plays into it. It's just exactly what we saw with the voters who were speaking to John Berman earlier, or what we saw in our exit polls, that they don't believe that Joe Biden legitimately won the election, even though he did. And the other thing that Donald Trump said there, which you cannot miss the irony, that he is coming out to tout a huge victory on Super Tuesday. And he says that the elections in the United States are like third world countries. But he's coming out and touting that he has just won part of the election process in United States history. And that is what it's going to look like over the next several months. And that's why it's notable, you know, in Biden's statement tonight that he put out about his own Super Tuesday performance, he noted directly that he's facing Donald Trump, he believes, come November, and said he is determined to destroy our democracy. That is what the president's campaign is going to be honing in on.
And Aaron, as I toss to you, what Biden campaign officials say is that they are convinced that the more voters hear that kind of thing from Donald Trump, the more they are reminded of the Trump years that weren't necessarily what they are talking about mostly these days, which is that they had more money in their bank accounts and they felt more flush going to the grocery store.
former Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren of the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Thanks so much for being here, Senator. So Donald Trump's pretty close to winning the Republican nomination to get enough delegates to clinch it, despite what happened January 6th.
Yeah.
91 criminal counts,
Yeah.
being found liable of sex abuse and defamation. Despite all of that, this race has not really been competitive on the Republican side. What do you make? It's a two-parter for you, Professor. What do you make of, A, the fact that Donald Trump does seem to have this clinched up and has the whole time, and B, that even with all those vulnerabilities, it's competitive, if not Trump in the lead against Biden?
So let's do the first part. Donald Trump's supporters are Donald Trump's supporters. You know, ask them. Many of them are election deniers. They're in with Donald Trump all the way. But here's the part that I think is really important. Donald Trump really hasn't done anything in the last 3 years to try to expand the number of people to join the Trump family. And I think what this is going to come down to is going to just be a comparison. We're already there. And we're going to have two people who both have been president and who will have records to run on. So Donald Trump, basically 4 years as president, did two things. One, he got an extremist Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade. And two, he got the biggest tax cut in a zillion years, $2 trillion, mostly sucked up by millionaires, billionaires, and giant corporations. Joe Biden, in 3 years, has managed to cut costs for working families. So now there's $35 insulin. 4 million people have seen their student loan debt canceled. And he has also brought more fairness to the tax code. First time we have a 15% minimum corporate tax on these billionaire corporations, and largest climate package in the history of the world. So I think what they've done is going to be a big part, certainly not all of it, but a big part of how this election is going to shape up.
Senator, one of the things you just said was that Donald Trump hasn't done anything to expand his base or his electorate. What they are trying to do in the Trump campaign is very much encroach on traditionally Democratic voters, Black voters, Hispanic voters. Some of the things that you just said are the arguments that, of course, we expect the Biden campaign to make going forward. There is some frustration in Democratic quarters that those kinds of arguments aren't coming more specifically and loudly from the president himself.
So I think what you're saying is the president needs to brag more.
I'm asking you.
I think he should brag more. I think he's got plenty to brag about. Thursday's going to be the State of the Union. I hope he does a lot of bragging. I also hope that he talks about the things he wants to do, like universal child care and housing, the things we need to work on. But here's the thing I think most of all. I hope that what we're going to see is just Joe Biden being Joe Biden. Because Joe Biden ultimately has got a good heart. I know who Joe Biden fights for. Joe Biden gets out there every day and fights for people like the diabetic who has gone from paying $200 a month to $35 a month, for the person getting crushed by student loan debt, the public school teacher who just can't pay off those debts. He's out there fighting for those people. He's fighting for people who wanted a job and now have got a job. That's Joe Biden. Trump, who does he fight for? Donald Trump, first and last.
I don't think I'm giving you any news you don't know, but there are a lot of warning signs going off on how effectively Joe Biden is going to be able to rebuild the coalition that got him elected in 2020. A lot of progressives, a lot of Muslim Americans and Arab Americans in Michigan, certainly, but not only them, other progressives upset with the way he supported Netanyahu during this war. I know that a lot of Democrats are really worried about those voters, 100,000 in Michigan who voted uncommitted, not voting for Trump, but either staying at home or going third party, going for Cornel West, going for Jill Stein, going for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. How worried are you, and what do you say to those voters to get them to come home?
So I want to start in a different place, because for me, this isn't about politics. This is ultimately about doing what's right. I understand that there are extraordinarily passionate feelings about what has happened in Gaza, what has happened in Israel. People feel very engaged and very invested. And the key is that we're all trying to drive to the same place. And that is, we need a permanent, peaceful solution in the Middle East. Look, we got 4 things we need to do, and we need to do them right now. We need those hostages returned. We need a ceasefire. We need to open up so that there is plenty of humanitarian aid flowing in. And we need to push leadership so that it's moving toward a permanent peace. That is a two-state solution. That is two places for two peoples who can live in peace with dignity, security, and who can have self-determination for their futures. And as much as wrong, there's a sliver of hope that this moment opens up, that other countries in the region are ready to push. The United States, we need to push hard, and we need to push those parties toward a peaceful solution. That's where we want to get. We need to push harder to get there.
Senator Elizabeth Warren from the great Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Senator.
Thanks so much for being here. And we, you have to give the devil his due. Donald Trump having the night that he wanted to have, an early projection of Virginia. Bad news for Nikki Haley, who thought maybe that was a Commonwealth she could wrest away from Donald Trump. Dan.
Yeah, I mean, Jake, Virginia, North Carolina, these were two of the states we were looking at, obviously early because the polls close early. But in addition to that, because those used to be solidly red states, and now Virginia has been trending blue, and North Carolina in particular is one that I was just getting a text from a senior Republican saying that this could be a big problem for Donald Trump if, we're also looking at down ballot races, if Mark Robinson, who is very Trumpy, maybe even more Trumpy